Well, time now for our focus report. Today we're looking at European jihadists. Europe has seen an increase in the number of its citizens hearing and answering the call of jihadists in Iraq and Syria. Spain, a hotbed of recruitment, notably in its North African enclave of Ceuta. Police there made a series of arrests in recent weeks, men who they say were highly trained militarily and ready to die for the cause. Our reporters Jean Gordillo, Marion, Touboul and Sarah Morris travelled to Ceuta to find out more. Here's their report.
To get to Ceuta, you cross the Strait of Gibraltar, because Ceuta is a Spanish enclave in Africa, a little piece of Europe just 17 square kilometres. We visit El Príncipe, one of the most dangerous neighbourhoods in Europe. It's also become a hotbed of European jihadists.
Whatever you do, don't film me.
Our driver won't talk to us on camera. Drug dealers hang out on the street corners and rub shoulders with more and more young people signing up to become jihadists. Our camera isn't welcome.
This is a very sensitive neighborhood. Lower the camera. The last few people arrested lived around here, just over there.
In an early morning raid in January, the police arrested 4 men in this street in El Príncipe. They were 2 pairs of brothers suspected of planning an attack on Spanish soil. They have a similar profile to the Kouachi brothers who carried out the Paris shooting at Charlie Hebdo. They're believed to have written this message: Charlie was nothing. The Islamic State is just beginning.
These were 2 brothers who were highly radicalized, who worked in a military way and were mentally very well trained. They were on the verge of carrying out an attack.
One of the suspects was Mohammed, a young Spaniard of Moroccan origin, who was perfectly well integrated in Spain. He worked in this cafe in the centre of Ceuta. The regulars are astonished by his arrest.
He was a really gentle guy, calm and dependable.
I can't stop thinking that I might have rubbed shoulders or eaten next to a potential murderer.
Mohammed's boss is shocked. She took him on 3 years ago and never noticed any signs he was adopting radical views.
He was a good worker. He served and carried ham sandwiches without wearing gloves or anything. He even served alcohol.
How could a young man so well integrated in society end up embracing Islamist violence? This journalist has tried to answer that question.
This is him here on the photo, and it's hard to suspect anything about him. Here he was his colleagues sharing the king's cake, so he's gone from celebrating Epiphany to jihad. Perhaps he was recruited by someone who infiltrated a local mosque, or perhaps it was over the internet.
Jihadist recruiters do indeed target social networks and chat rooms, but this journalist thinks they're also crossing into Spain to do the job in person.
In the town just over the border in Morocco, there is a network of jihadists. They cross the border to recruit people right here in the Príncipe neighborhood. Some of them are even living there right now. We saw that in the latest anti-terrorist operation.
Like all Ceuta residents, Mohammed made regular trips to Morocco. Thousands of people cross back and forth over the border every day. They have permits to do so. But police are now stepping up border checks, angering some locals.
The police don't want to let us go through. They said no one will go through.
The police are trying to identify recruiters at work in Ceuta. They think the extremists indoctrinate young Muslims who worship at local mosques.
Lots of people come to pray here. I can't check on the real intentions of all those worshippers who come. People only come here to pray. The majority of the jihadists that you see in the newspapers must have been recruited online.
We ask whether the 4 suspected jihadists, including Mohammed, ever attended this mosque. We're told that Ceuta's mosques are supervised very closely by the state. The head of the Muslim Association keeps central files on every one of them.
Mosques are required to keep files like these. They contain details of the paperwork and actions undertaken by the mosques, such as grants, the regulation of imams, and we've got a lot of files on El Príncipe.
Very close attention is paid to El Príncipe.
El Príncipe has 14 mosques. If we didn't carry out all these checks, thanks to our staff and the imams, I'm not sure who would end up controlling the neighborhood. It could end up being like Afghanistan.
In the last year, the authorities have arrested about 15 suspected terrorists like Mohammed. Unemployment, poverty and a high school dropout rate are fueling extremist ideas.
We're going to start to learn the tools that will help you to find a job.
In the neighbourhood's only social services centre, the idea is to help young people find a happier place in their society.
To fight all types of fanaticism, you need to give people the intellectual tools to say no, and we need to help them to fight for a better future.
But the centre's best efforts couldn't prevent 16 young people from Ceuta from joining the ranks of jihadism. Most came from this neighbourhood.
My children don't go outside and don't mix with others because they're frightened.
They get you to believe that you are going to have money, that you get things easily, but the reality is either you end up in prison or dead.
Spain is stepping up the battle against Islamist violence with a new anti-terrorism plan. Authorities say action is urgent. Last year, police dismantled 5 jihadist cells.
Well, joining us now to talk further on this is William Lawrence, a visiting professor at George Washington University and a North African analyst. Mr. Lawrence, thank you so much for your time. Tell me, do you think that Spain is the real recruitment hotbed for European jihadists? And is that because of the geographical position of Ceuta?
No. This type of recruiting is happening all over Europe, notably France, Belgium, Holland. Certainly, these Muslims of Ceuta, they have the documentation that ISIS recruiters are looking for and other jihadists. So there's a certain opportunity in Ceuta that isn't found elsewhere. People who may not be very well integrated in Spanish society but have the right documentation. But this is happening all over Europe. And this has been going on for some years in Ceuta. It's not a new phenomenon. What's going on now is it's becoming more prevalent.
Indeed, and we saw their police trying to take more controls of the borders. Do you think that can have any real long-term lasting effect?
Yes and no. On the one hand, I've been through that border many, many times, and it's very technological. They're very aware of what's going on. They found my car with a different license plate and registration number from years before having crossed that border. So they're very technologically savvy, but it's also a big smuggling point. And if you stay on the border for a couple of hours, you'll see streams of people running across the border with contraband. And what's happening here is the criminal and smuggling networks are mixed with the jihadi networks. And it's kind of hard for authorities sometimes to track people who are in both of those different communities, as we saw with the Charlie Hebdo attacks in France, that these terrorists were both being tracked as terrorists and tracked as criminals, but that wasn't being necessarily well integrated by authorities.
Now, we've seen there in recent days the Islamic State group's presence in Libya really making the headlines. Were you surprised by that? Given that you studied a lot in North Africa, how present do you believe they are across that region?
Well, ISIS is expanding in Libya. They have several small enclaves, small caliphates that they're declaring. Didn't surprise me at all. What surprised me is the scale. 21 cops murdered in one fell swoop. And so, again, like we saw in Ceuta and elsewhere, these aren't new phenomena, but they're being ramped up and scaled up for shock value. So that's exactly what the ISIS jihadists are looking for. They're looking to shock, to a forced conflict. This is their game, and they actually like the fact that Egypt has been provoked into bombing Libya once again.
And as you say, nothing new, if you like, in the phenomenon, but it does appear to be spreading. However, a lot of the young recruits we see all have a similar profile, this lone wolf kind of ousted from society and generally from poor areas. Is perhaps that the area that governments need to look at?
Yes and no. I mean, not all terrorists come from underprivileged backgrounds, and a lot of the recruiters come from middle class and even upper class backgrounds in many cases. So these are society-wide phenomena. I also like to dispel a little bit this idea of lone wolves. We don't have a lot of lone wolves doing this kind of thing. I've been calling them lately wolf packs. So little groups of 2, 3, 5, 6 individuals who get usually radicalized on the internet, not in a mosque, and they get turned on to do local acts, which they then try to affiliate with some greater cause. I think what's linking all of this is there's a lot of displaced, marginalized young people looking for meaning, and they're not finding it, and so they're seeking it in this way.
Indeed, okay, packs of wolves rather than lone wolves, heard and adopted. William Laurence, visiting professor there at George Washington University. Thank you indeed for joining us.